Now, other than COVID facilitated and sped this up, this is probably where we were going anyway with technology, and it became more acceptable.
For sure.
Why do you think these churches think, well, this is how we're going to reach the next generation? Because in the old days, we'd knock on doors, and then when that didn't work, we became seeker sensitive. Then when they grew up and got old, to reach the millennials now and the Xers and all that, we've got to do virtual church. We got to go where they are. Do you think that's the motivation? And welcome once again to another edition of Footnotes. Today, we are going to be talking with smart people. We're going to be talking with Timothy, who has a PhD in, what is it, Timothy? Is it good looks? Is that what your PhD is in? That's what he says. PhD in good looks. And then Brady, who has a PhD in some kind of something or other. I'm not really sure. And we're going to be talking to them today, and they're going to be filling us in on smarts. All right, so this episode is called Smarts. What do you think about that? Smarts. Brady, is that a laugh or is that a concern?
Oh, my. I don't know how to respond to that.
Okay, well, just say I'm smarts.
Sure.
All right, so in all seriousness, Brady just completed his study at seminary. He completed his PhD. He did it on online church. And just to give a reference, tell us what the title was again.
Virtual Presence is Actual Absence, Examining Online Churches in Light of Biblical and Historical Ecclesiology.
So virtual presence is actually you're absent.
It's actual absence.
Yeah, so you're not really coming to church, even though you watch it online.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of people out there that might say, well, I watch church online every week. And I'm so glad that you have it online. We have our church online. With that in mind and with that out there, you kind of wrote against that, right?
Yeah, well, and there's, we can kind of get into technical definitions of, watching a live stream occasionally when you're sick or you're out of town or something versus you only do church via technology, via computer is basically what I was writing against. And, that's a big difference, watching a service versus being present in a body of believers who you've covenanted with, right? That's a very different thing than just watching a live stream video of someone who you don't know, who doesn't know you, kind of thing like that. So, yeah.
All right, well, here's how we're going to frame the discussion. Brady's going to tell us all the data that he's learned and gathered and maybe help us think through virtual attendance at church. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it something that we need to rethink and reconsider? And here's how we're going to frame the conversation. Number one, we are going to talk about the problem that's out there right now, the situation that we're in ever since COVID. Everything's changed globally. It's almost like a fourth industrial revolution took place when COVID happened, and technology that was already present was sped up and began to be used and began to be implemented, and that's had great effect not only on the church but on everything, restaurants, movie theaters, you name it. It's changed the landscape. So we're going to talk about that change and the situation that we're in. Secondly, some of the repercussions of that. What are the problems that are associated with that change? What are we seeing happening in the church due to that? And finally, what are the solutions? So what's our situation? What's the problems associated with that situation? And what are the solutions? So Brady, let's start here. What's our situation since COVID happened? Where is the church at? Like when you did your research, did you find that churches generally had better attendance before COVID and now they don't?
Yes, I mean, COVID definitely changed the world. Before COVID, many churches didn't do a lot of, online content or anything like that. So many churches, I found a stat, let's see. According to a Lifeway research study among Protestant pastors in the fall of 2019, before the height of the pandemic, only 22% of pastors polled live stream their entire worship service online. 22%. By April of 2020, 67% of churches were live streaming their entire service, and 97% offered some type of digital worship service. So before COVID, it was about 20%. After COVID, it was almost 100% of people did online services or some kind of online content, which granted, it was the pandemic. We're trying to figure out things and minister to people in a crazy situation. But we kind of adopted all this technology, and everything was kind of ramped up, and there was very little theological reflection on, okay, long-term effects of this, or, what's the wake of this. And so, the COVID, just made everything go digital, go virtual.
And to be fair, I mean, it was mother necessity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it was in the middle of the pandemic.
The mother of all inventions is necessity. So people were closing their doors, and they were like, well, if we're going to do anything, we got to go online. And a lot of churches hadn't really thought about that. It was a luxury before COVID, right? If you had internet and you had a good web page and you live streamed your service, my recollection, that was pretty cutting edge technology. A lot of churches in the late 2015, 16, 17 era, they would put the service on YouTube 2 or 3 days later. Mm-hmm. They would upload it. So they had it on there, but it wasn't live.
Yeah.
So then COVID comes along, necessity, well, we're going to have to do it live. So naturally, people would have done that. You would have had the numbers jump. I guess my question is, did you find out, did it stay that way? Did people stay out of church once they got out of the habit? And maybe your research didn't address that.
I mean, I'll give you my own personal experience at our previous church. Before COVID, we were running 200, 220, something like that. After COVID, we were about 100. Even after a year after the pandemic, we just had people never come back to church. We had some live streaming numbers, some people were watching, but there were people who just stopped going to church after COVID. They're like, I'm never coming back after that. Maybe that wasn't their original intention, but even from my own personal experience, about half our church never returned.
Do you think that is because, who knows what the reasons for that is? There's speculation everywhere. I was talking to a pastor recently, and they said something to me like, well, our numbers just have never come back up since COVID. And I'm like, that was 4 years ago, right? So I don't know, that surprised me. I feel like here, our numbers have come back up since COVID. When I came during COVID, I'd say we were running maybe, and this was after everything had shut down and we had kind of reopened things. Timothy, what would you say? It's fair to say 150 people, maybe. If it was a good day, it was maybe 200. This was during the pandemic, so this would have been like October, November 2020. But I felt like, 2 years later, things are getting back to normal. A lot of people started coming back to church. We gained members from other churches who had kind of become disenfranchised from their local congregation for whatever reason. They had stepped out. Now, this is speculation, and I don't know if you have any research on this, but do you think that some of those people stopped coming because the churches were unhealthy, and this was kind of an easy way to step out?
Yeah, sure. There's all kinds of different reasons why that could be the case. But my research, is mainly like, what is the church, and is watching a service online considered church, right? And biblically speaking, when all the churches, the called out ones, right, the assembly, you can't assemble, what all that means is a human being, body and soul, virtually, right? So it's a very different. You're watching content, you're consuming something, but you can't really be the church by watching a service, right? Like, occasionally you're at home, you're sick, you're whatever. But if that online churches, again, I'm examining, you're saying that, you're doing all of church virtually online. So your discipleship, your preaching, your ordinances, you're doing it all virtually through the internet. And my whole dissertation is basically that's not possible to do, right?
Well, then my question is, okay, well, how many people are doing that? Like, if I looked here at Broadway and I said, how many people are using our online service exclusively all the time still, like we were in 2020, I don't know. What would you say? Do we think there's people like that? And does the research say...
Yeah, so that's why there's a difference between, you could say, live streaming occasionally versus... So the churches like I examine, like Life.Church online, right? Craig Rochelle and his church, where they boast, they have like 100,000 something people who watch virtually, and they have virtual campuses, virtual small groups. Saddleback Community Online has I have an online pastor who just does small groups online. That's what I'm talking about. So I'm not talking about the occasional person who comes to church normally, but then occasionally watches a live stream or a shut-in.
Okay, well then let's make this distinction, because if I were a listener, I don't think I would have understood that, and I didn't until you just said it. So then there are churches, because this is definitely not our context.
No.
In South Haven or where we're at or at Broadway or really any other church around me that I know right now in this community. But you're saying, but there are churches that are pushing this digital online. This is what they're doing. Now, they're not doing that exclusively. Saddleback still has a service
They have a physical
in
campus.
Southern California, but they're hiring people. And they're saying, okay, we want you to just be this digital virtual pastor. Is that catching on? Are people actually doing that?
There are some. I mean, yes. There's that. There's Elevation Church has an EFAM, they call it, and then there's even extreme examples that I used, such as there's a church like in video games like Second Life, where they literally, it's just all completely, you go in this video game and go to church on the video game, and that's their church.
Now, and listen, if I had heard you just say that, I would have said, I don't believe that.
That's true.
But let me give you a real example. So my kids got an Oculus, which is a thing you put on your head, and it's really cool. It's virtual reality, and they had that video game thing. And James River Assembly, which is in Springfield, Missouri, has recently been all in the news because they had a men's conference and it went haywire, and Pastor John Lindell had to get up and say, we're not wrong and you can eat a sword if you want to, and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, not defending or discussing that, but that church, I remember when we got the Oculus, they, I guess, targeted us with our, identity and all that good stuff, and basically said, hey, we now have a Oculus VR campus at James. Join us in the VR campus.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? And the idea was you clicked on this app in your VR thing, and you became an avatar, and you went into a Minecraft looking church that was James River, and you interacted with people via avatar, like, hey, that's my buddy over there from California, and we attend virtual church together. And you could do this in your pajamas in your living room, never leaving the living room. And then I guess you heard a worship service or you sang with them or whatever. I don't know. I never attended. But this is what they were promoting. And I thought, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. But you're right. I wouldn't have believed that if they had not targeted me, because I would have thought, now, what fringe church is really doing something stupid like that? But more than we probably imagine.
Yeah, there's a VR church in the metaverse where they literally have, quote unquote services and baptisms. There's YouTube videos you can watch of little avatars who look like, not even humans going into this virtual water. And I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. As heart emojis are floating up from other avatars, and they think that's legitimate. And it's...
Timothy, have you been baptized in a VR church? Admit it. All right. Well, yeah, so that's out there. And then you've got these big mega churches. You mentioned Craig Groeschel. Yeah. Now, tell me who he is again. I know he's an author, and I know he has a weird last name.
I mean, he's a mega church pastor of Life.Church online. It's arguably one of the largest churches.
Is it Southern Baptist?
I don't know. It's evangelical free or something.
Okay. All right. I mean, I know who he is.
Yeah.
Didn't he write the book, Stop Asking Jesus Into Your Heart?
No, that's J.D. Greer.
Oh, okay. Same thing. Pretty sure. In the metaverse. Anyway, okay. That was J.D. Greer. Well, I can't tell them apart.
Yeah.
But Craig Groeschel, he writes a lot of books. He's pretty famous. Yeah. So he's got this meta church that people can watch.
Yeah. Online.
And that's become a big thing.
Yeah. So you can go on their website, and at any point of any time, they're playing videos of their, one of their physical campuses, but they have online small groups and online, pastors, and they try to facilitate this whole online campus, quote unquote, of people.
Now, other than COVID facilitated and sped this up, this is probably where we were going anyway with technology, and it became more acceptable.
For sure.
Why do you think these churches think, well, this is how we're going to reach the next generation? Because in the old days, we'd knock on doors, and then when that didn't work, we became seeker sensitive to reach the boomers or whatever. And when they grew up and got old, to reach the millennials now and the Xers and all that, we've got to do virtual church. We got to go where they are. Do you think that's the motivation?
Yeah, I think their intent is good, right? I think missions can breed like desires to adapt and whatnot and to reach people with the gospel. My thing is you can reach people with the gospel, but you can't do church virtually, right? Like you can take the gospel message and send that in a text message, an email, a video, but to do church, to live life together, to do the Lord's Supper, baptism, church discipline, all the things that the church is an assembly of God's people covenanted together. You can't just do that on any kind of digital platform, right? You can talk about Jesus while playing video games, awesome, but you can't be the church doing that, playing video games, if that makes sense. So you can use technology in a lot of ways to deliver the message of the gospel, but to be the church virtually, that's where I think they go too far, and you can't biblically do that. If you look at what is the church supposed to do and be, they can use the internet. I think posting a sermon online, great, like have people hear the gospel, but does that mean we try to do all of the church's jobs virtually? Like, does that mean,
and let's back up a little bit. So we can criticize these people doing the metaverse and all that, but the local churches have been doing things like this that are honestly just as reprehensible. Is that a word, reprehensible?
I think so.
Yeah, Timothy says it's a word. For example, you go to a church physically, but you're not really known.
Yeah.
And I've heard people tell me that. They said, well, I was a member of that church, but they had 7 services, and they had one on Saturday night and one on Friday morning at 3 a.m., and they had all these services. And I would just go in, and nobody really knew if I was there or not, and nobody connected with me, and I just kind of attended the event and left. Now, you never know. Who knows? That church may have really been intentionally trying to reach people. Every situation is different. And I want to be careful because it also always depends on the person. How intentional were you, right? How intentional did you get involved? But the point that I'm making is a lot of churches, globally, nationally, they were doing this kind of unknown, untouchable church membership for years before COVID. So it was already accepted. I can go in and be unknown. I don't really know my pastor. I don't really know other members. I'm not in a community group. I just attend. So I think once COVID started, it's like, well, what difference is there in me doing it on campus versus online? It's easier online. I can eat my cinnamon roll and stay in my pajamas, and I can still feel like I was attending church. Case in point, when COVID broke out in the Texas town where I was at, and I'm not trying to be critical of this other church. They're a good church and good people, and I think they meant well. But for decades, they had fashioned their programming really around seeker sensitive, right? We're going to try to attract the most lost people that we can. And they had all these multiple services. And what I heard the leadership saying after COVID was, or during COVID was, we can't get people to come back. But I think, and the way I ascertained their experience, what they were seeing, they were saying, these people realize that they're getting the same thing if they come here on campus versus if they sit at home. It's no different. So they're going to just sit at home. We can't get them to come back. Well, because fundamentally, perhaps, your whole approach was flawed, right? So you were doing church as just come to an event, whereas it needs to be come to a community and a family.
That's right. And
be a part of the family. So I think churches were doing this before COVID, and I think COVID just exposed a lot of the flaws that really people weren't thinking through. No, that's me.
Yeah.
And then people said, well, I don't have to go back. I'm doing the same thing. That they didn't know me there, they're not going to know me here.
Yeah, if church is just a TED Talk where I come and listen to a little motivational speak, well, you can watch that on YouTube. You can do that anywhere. But if it's a family that I got to get to see how people are doing, I got to serve and teach, the children, or I've got to use my gifts, and I want to, bear one another's burdens and take the Lord's Supper and witness and participate in a baptism. Well, those are things you can't just do watching a TED Talk, right? You need to be at the church, be a part of the church, do those things.
Well, and wouldn't you say backing up before COVID, I mean, that's the way a lot of people approach church in general.
Yeah,
was I'm just going to come and listen to this guy speak, and they still approach it that way. To our best efforts, we still hear people, say, and you see it even at our church. They won't come to Sunday school, whoever they are, visitors, guests, members, whatever, won't come to Sunday school, won't go to a home group, won't serve in any capacity in the nursery or whatever, they won't serve, but they're going to come and they're going to sit. Yeah. Well, how is that any different than doing it online? And so I think we had all these problems pre-COVID, personally speaking. I think it just exacerbated the issues. And I think a lot of people just said, well, I don't have to come back because the way it was designed pre-COVID was faulty. I think COVID exposed a lot of our faults.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
As a general church culture, I think it exposed, honestly, a lot of things that probably needed to die anyway. And the Lord just used it to push us, and the churches that weren't very healthy. I mean, I think a lot of people were looking for a save face way out. And if they just left under normal circumstances, well, then I'm going to have to tell my neighbor why I left and why I'm not in church anymore. Well, now they can just say, well, COVID, and I'm watching it online over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
definitely.
So that's definitely the situation that we're in, right? And we see this pre-COVID, we see it during COVID, and we even see some of the same effects after COVID, people just dealing with this. And this is the way maybe a new generation of pastors are trying to reach out to people, the metaverse, and that's not good, right? That's what we're saying. It's not good.
Yeah, that's not literally embodied Christianity. That I don't think Jesus, when he called us to deny ourselves, pick up our cross, and follow him, he meant just virtually when you want to on the metaverse through a headpiece, an eye set. So yeah, that's not real life, right? That's not what Christ has called us to do.
So what you're saying is this whole idea that I had today, and I was going to tell you this after the podcast, that we were going to make you our pastor of the metaverse. I just prayed about that this morning, and so you're saying you're not for that?
Yeah, that's a no for me, dog.
All right, take that off the board, Timothy. All right, we'll have to pray about something else. Next idea, let me think. All right, so let's go to number 2, and by the way, that was a joke. Let's go to number 2. Let's talk about, so why do we see this as serious? Why do we see this as a problem? So this is the situation we find ourselves in the 21st century after COVID. There may be lots of reasons for it, lots of speculation, some research. Okay, so why would we say this is bad? So let's take this back, and I know that your project wasn't really about churches that just had a online option, but let's talk about that for a minute, because to me that's very personal, I think, to every church. Mm-hmm. You got these fringe churches out there like Saddleback and Craig Groeschel who are doing meta stuff, and James River Assembly, but let's just talk about local churches here. I would even say it's not a great idea to watch church online, really steadily anytime.
Yeah.
And how would you respond to that? Like, wouldn't we say it's probably best to only do that when you have to? Now, somebody listening might say, well, is it wrong for me to watch when I have to? Well, let's kind of talk through that.
Yeah, personally, I would think, if you're providentially hindered, you're sick at home with a fever, you probably shouldn't come to church, right? You're thrown up, just stay home. But yeah, it might be nice to, watch the worship service and hear the sermon that morning. That you're providentially hindered, or you're a shut-in and you can't get out. You have no way of getting to church. I think those kind of things, or if you had to work or something, you're a firefighter and you can't make it the service that day, that week, you're on duty, then you can't be at church. That's one thing. But to just like habitually, it was late last night, I'm just going to sleep in and catch it online. I think that's not a wise decision, right? And I think you're missing out again if it's not just, church is not just a TED Talk, right? It's family. It's, it's using your gifts. It's bearing one of those burdens, all the one another commands. It's, hugging a brother and sister in Christ. It's hearing the preaching of the word, singing with the saints, and encouraging one another with your voice. And so there's so much more than just, I heard a message on a video and that was my church, right? And even the words we use, we watch, right? You watch. You're not a participant. You watched it. You're an observer. You're watching other people worship because everyone's who's watched this live stream service, it's not the same thing, right? We're at home, the kids are screaming and crying. It's not like you're there. You're just watching other people worship at church while you're not there. And so I think it's one of those things occasionally, again, as providentially hindered, But if we make it a habit, there is data for people who tend to habitually do that will eventually drop out of church and just not come back because it's not the same thing. And so
it's a gateway drug.
It is a bit of a gateway drug. Like, you do that, eventually we're like, well, I'm just not going to do this at all, and you just stop. So I do think it's one of those things where, I mean, it has maybe a place, but yeah, I definitely would not encourage people. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, I have a friend, and I love him, and he has been so instrumental in my life, and he never listens to these podcasts, so he won't hear this. But watch, he'll start listening this week. But he and I have discussed this many times, and you don't know him. He lives in a complete different city in the United States, but he's very faithful in the choir at this very large Southern Baptist church in the city where he lives. And it's a mega city. It's huge. But he won't go in the service. He will sing in the choir, and then they dismiss the choir, after the song service. And he leaves, and he walks and listens to the sermon on the internet live. And he says, well, I don't want to go in there and sit by myself. And he's single, so I understand that. I mean, to a degree. He's like, well, I don't want to go in there and sit by myself. But I'm thinking, but you need to be in there, and you need to get to know some people and sit with some people.
Yeah.
But really, I visited this church a couple of years ago, and very famous preacher was at this church at one time. And a lot of those people in the choir don't go to church. They do their choir thing, and then they disappear. I don't know. I was blown away by that. And I thought, I feel, you're listening to the sermon, and this brother is faithful. Let me defend him on this. He's faithful every week to listen on his ride home, or when he's walking around, whatever, where he walks. He's faithful to listen to the sermon every week. And he tells me about the sermon, and he encourages me to go online and listen to the pastor who preached it and said, you really ought to listen to this. And I do. I mean, I'm glad it's on their, recap and all that. But I'm always like, I tell him you need to be in there. And he's like, why? I'm like, because I just think you need to be in there. And I think that is a picture of the bigger issue that we have in America today with Christianity.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll just come and attend an event. I have another friend who's a pastor in Little Rock, and I won't say the name of the church. It's not Baptist, but it's huge. It's one of the bigger ones. And they don't call their worship service a worship service. They call it the event. Something like that. He said, we call that, we have a 9:30 experience and an 11 experience or event or whatever they call it. So it's not a service, it's an experience.
Yeah.
And I think when you build things like that and you're okay with things like that, that's why when COVID comes along, people don't come back.
Yeah.
Because they see through your funniness. They see through your funny business, and they're like, that's not, I can sit at home and do that. I can walk around the track and do that. But church is more than that. Let's talk about that. Church is more, because I don't know that our people often understand this. Even locally here, people come. But what else would we expect them to do within the 2 hours they're here? And why do we ask them to come back on Wednesday night? And why do we ask them to be in a home group and consider a discipleship group? I think we've programmed everything here intentionally to connect you with people as much as possible. But people kind of have this attitude, well, I don't need to come to the dinner on Wednesday. I know all that. I'm not interested in that. Or they think, I'm busy, or I'm not going to join a home group or whatever. But that is where you're going to take what you heard and live it out, right? So there's so much more than just coming and sitting. What are some of those practical mores that we would say you should be doing every Sunday when you walk in and then throughout the week with your church family?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the early church, and I mean, they gathered regularly together, they fellowshiped, they broke bread together, they took the Lord's Supper together, they baptized new converts, they prayed with each other, for each other, they served one another. So it's completely different from the kind of event like modern Christianity, Americanism, just come to this nameless event, no one knows your name, just very different from that. So I think, again, the one another's in Scripture, every time you read one another, in the context of the New Testament. That's for believers in the in the local churches to do those one another's to one another. So yes, can you pray for someone without being near them? Can you pray someone somewhere across the country? Yeah, you can pray anytime, anywhere. But how do you bear one another's burdens from someone you don't even know their name? You don't know what's going on in their life. You don't ever spend time with that person, right? How do you serve one another, greet one another, right? How do you do those things? Or Hebrews 10:24, do not forsake the gathering, right? And to encourage one another and stir each other up for love and good works. So our presence, right, when we're gone, we're not singing, we're not encouraging our brothers and sisters. If we're not in a Sunday school class or a home group, we're not getting really any fellowship and getting to know people on a deeper level. If we're not using our gifts to serve, right, the Holy Spirit's given us gifts. And yeah, I guess like your friend who comes and sings in the choir and then leaves, it's like he's using one of his gifts, but what other gifts does he have, or what he's not letting other people to use their gifts to serve him either. So he's just kind of bouncing out quick. And so yeah, I think you see read the Bible and you go, okay, does online church match how the church is described in the New Testament? I would say it's a totally different thing. It doesn't match this at all or reflect this family life, this body life that is in the Bible that describes the church. So it's just this gathering of people, and things like baptism, Lord's Supper, we have a very poor view of those ordinances of Christ and how baptism is our public profession of faith, and it's the church affirming our testimony, right? You can't get baptized at home alone in your bathtub. That's not how it works, right? It's the church's act affirming your testimony.
Wait, so when I baptize people in my swimming pool, that doesn't count?
Yeah, no.
Timothy, mark that down.
Or the Lord's Supper, right? That is where the many become one. It's where we remind ourselves of our identity in Christ. We look to one another and see how we're treating one another. I mean, read 1 Corinthians 11 and how Paul talks about the Lord's Supper, how important it is. And so that's not something you can just do at home by yourself. It's like it's the body coming together. It's us remembering Christ's death for us. We're the body of Christ together. And so all those things are extremely important. Without baptism, Lord's Supper, there is no church, right? It doesn't exist. And so I think people don't understand those things. They think this is just optional. This isn't important. And, you read your Bible and you go, okay, this is a lot more than just coming to hear a sermon. This is a lifestyle. This is a family. This is, we should build our lives upon the local church. And most, nominal American Christians don't do that. They think this is an optional spiritual Netflix I can watch occasionally when I want a little pick-me-up. It's not my family. It's not my life. It's not what I'm giving my life to. It's just kind of an optional spiritual Netflix.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And so we need to push people more and more with the problems that we see happening to say, join a church where you can be a part of a family.
Yes.
So that's what we've tried to emphasize here, and that's also what we've tried to design here. So we do try to have moments where we break bread together.
Yes.
Wednesday night, right? You can sit around, or home groups.
Yes.
You can go to there and break bread. We try to design times when you pray with each other.
Yes.
We have our prayer service once a month. We have our home groups. I'm just pointing that out because we're trying to be as intentional as we can be. I think one of the lasting testimonies to Broadway Baptist Church is that there were a core group of people who have seen this church as their family for 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
When I teach the Beginning at Broadway class once a month, with you, I always try to point to Jackie Crone in the room and say, now, Miss Jackie has been a member here since 1975. So when I was 1 year old, she and George joined this church. Her children, some of her children are here, some of her grandchildren are here, and Miss Jackie is still here serving. How many churches can say, there's some, but we've got members. She's not the only one. I mean, I could point to Mary and Dennis. I could point to Jerry and Susan. I could point to, who am I going to leave out? Other people, right? We could keep going, but there's a lot of people you can point to and say, these people have been members here since the 70s.
Yeah.
And when you look back at the history of this church, there were a lot of reasons people could have walked out, and I'm going to be honest, a lot of people did. That is not a secret. One man sat me down and told me he's not a member here any longer, but his big shtick is that every church in this community has former Broadway members in it. And they were all members of Broadway, and they've all gotten mad at Broadway, and they've all left. And I don't know that I can argue with that. I have no idea. But I don't know that they should have gotten mad. I mean, part of being in a family is you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the Church of God. The Church of God. Right, Timothy? There's a time you got to go and show you know about the Church of God. Wasn't that the TV show with Tootie? Pretty sure. You know what I'm talking about, Brady?
No, I have no idea what
that didn't come up in your research?
No.
Okay. The world will ever see. You don't know that? Come on, you never watched that? Blair and Joe and
Facts Alive.
Yeah, there we go, Miss Garrett.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Been a minute. Well, anyway, you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the Church of God. I mean, there's no church perfect.
For sure.
So people ran out because there was a better youth group down the street. I mean, that happened in the 04s, and they're running out to go to the next big thing, and they run over there. And then they leave that church and they go over here because it's the next big woo-ha-ha. But there were people that stayed. And there were things that happened. We had staff issues that happened at this church where it split the church before my time. Tim has talked about this publicly and on the podcast. And, there were people who said, this is my church and I'm not walking out and I'm going to stick it out. And I would hope those people would look back today and say it was worth it. Was it hard? Yes. Did it bring hard times? Yes, but we're here.
Yeah.
And the Lord has been faithful, and He gives seasons of good, and He sometimes gives seasons of drought, but He restores the years the locusts eat. So those people are precious, and I think about those people and think, man, what a testimony.
Yes.
But a lot of churches today, I just wonder, are these mega churches, could they ever say that? Man, this member's been here since 1975. They're still serving. Their family's here. They're loving people. That's what church is about, right? Be a part of a family. And I think what's gotten Broadway through thick and thin over the years was people committed, this is my church home.
Yeah. And God uses that kind of commitment to one another to change us, sanctify us, grow us. I mean, if we all just bail, right, there isn't going to be a church left. If we all just leave anytime anything gets hard, right, what does that tell the watching world, the unbelievers, that, man, Christians don't really love each other much, do they? They just constantly leave each other. They don't hold their vows, their promises. But if we have people like Miss Jackie Cronin, the Cherries, and others who've stayed, that shows a testament of love, of Christian love, that, man, through thick and through thin for years, they're here, they're serving, they're growing. And that is a testimony to other believers, but also to the world that, man, they're people of their word. That's a testimony of God's grace in their life. Where, again, if you're just watching a service and you just turn it off, and that's just you just consumed a product. You're not part of a family you haven't been with for years.
And then it's like, then we get into this thing. If you're going to consume a product, you're going to want the best product.
Mm-hmm.
So now, instead of being local, why would you? People say, I watch you online. I don't believe that. I mean, why would you watch me online? Watch Adrian Rogers online, or watch, who else? Charles Stanley online, or watch Matt Chandler or somebody. I don't know. There's probably better people if you're going to do that. I just don't really believe I'm that popular that you're going to watch me online, but they say that. They'll see you out. I watch you online. And I do think, I'm kind of being facetious, I do think there are people who go to other churches and they do watch us because they want to be involved. Like your mother is one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
she watches every week. So let me backtrack, okay, and say there are good, wonderful people who want to just be connected to Broadway, and they do watch us every week. Yeah. I'm talking about that person that doesn't go to church at all anywhere, and they're like, they just feel guilty when they see me, and they're like, I watch you every week, and I'm like, I don't know about that. I mean, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Who knows?
Well, that goes back to another reason is online church is very consumeristic. It's about what you want, when you want it. It becomes content. It's, again, church is not supposed to be this competing with each other and we're better than you, and that's not. Again,
go and be known.
Yeah.
That's the problem. You got to go and be known.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Have you ever seen, I had to watch this movie in my social work classes at Ole Miss. Part of my degree program, I had to take some social work classes, and the professor made us watch the old Johnny Depp, Leonardo DiCaprio movie, What's Eating Gilbert Grape? And we had to write, a test was to write a paper on What's Eating Gilbert Grape, so we watched it as a class. And there's this hilarious scene, and I've always thought about the church in that movie, where I guess Gilbert is Johnny Depp. Gilbert Grape is Johnny Depp, and he works at this little mom and pop store, but this super duper mart comes to town, and he's so conflicted because all of his friends are going to the super duper mart, and he's wanting to stay loyal to this family who's helped him out and loved on him, and he wants to be loyal to hometown. And so finally one day he breaks down because he can't find something, and he goes into the super duper mart, and the whole scene where he walks in, and it's amazing, and they have 50 million of everything, and they've and you can just see the tension on his face. He's like, I'm giving in to the culture, I'm walking into the super duper mart. And to me, that's the way people are now viewing church. It's like they're giving up the mom and pop, right? And they're giving up the local, and they're walking into the evil, shop around. They're giving up the shop around the corner, and they're going to Fox Books, or they're going to the Super Duper Mart or whatever. And you lose a lot when you do that. You lose a lot.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, for sure. That's kind of a good analogy.
You've got mail. All right.
Yes.
Now.
I picked up that reference, actually.
Did you?
I did.
They need to make a replay of that movie.
Yeah.
They need to get Tom Hanks and her back together because they got married, we assume, in the movie, and they need to show what happened to Fox Books once Amazon wiped them out. So now it's not the shop around the corner. It's the Fox Books is gone around the corner due to Amazon. And you could see Tom Hanks struggling.
Yeah.
Right? But that would kind of, you could kill off Meg Ryan, but that would kind of be like Sleepless in Seattle, and he already did that. So anyway, we'll pray about that. Okay. All right, well, moving on. What's the solution to all this, Brady? What's the solution?
So the solution...
What's eating Gilbert Grape?
Yes, so virtual presence is actual absence, and the solution is to be present. Right?
What? I never would have guessed that was where you were going.
Yes, so find a local church, commit to it, be there, serve, get to know people, show hospitality, listen to the sermon, use your spiritual gifts, serve others, right? Live an embodied life, right? You are a soul and a physical body, so act like it, right? We have bodies, we can only be one place one time. And so, live your life in the real world, not just on the internet, virtual things that aren't really technically real, right? Give yourself to a local church. Build your life on a local church, right? Because Christ died for it. Christ promised to build his church, so if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. Let's build our lives on local church, right? Yeah. And keep your word, right? And that doesn't mean there's never a time, right, where, it's not like, necessarily as much of a marriage vow, right, where, when you become a member of a church, that doesn't mean you're never going to, move away, or you're always going to be till death do you part a member of that church. But again, I think the quality of our relationships, how God can grow us if we stay, and if we serve and get involved, we're going to grow exponentially more than if we're just hopping around every 2 years and we're never really known. No one really knows us. A pastor hasn't been walking with us for decades. Well, that's a whole different level of family and church life than if we're just constantly kind of consumers jumping around. Right?
Yeah. And it's not wrong to watch it online. Like, my wife she got to go with the North Point Choir to a competition, and they had a worship service Sunday morning where they were. Yeah. But she said, when we got in the car at 10 o'clock to go home, I tuned you in and we watched you. And
exactly.
That's not wrong. So she got 2 church services in one day, and she was like, I'm so glad I got to watch, and I got to be a part of it. And so that was helpful. And there's always going to be moments like that.
Absolutely.
Where we can't be here. But I think what you're saying definitely is that can't be the way of life.
That's right.
It can't be the norm. Churches shouldn't be pushing that.
That's right.
You got to be present.
That's right. It's not the same. Right. Yeah. It's, again, occasionally you're providentially hindered. You're traveling, you're sick, you're shut in, whatever. Yes, there's a place for that. But again, if you are able, build your life in a local church. It's not the same thing, right? Watching.
So when somebody comes in, what are some practical, quick things that you would encourage them to do to just be known and be here?
Yeah. So, I would say, Get here early. Come to Sunday school.
Oh, wait, back up. Go slow now.
Okay, sorry.
Get here early.
Get here early.
Let's talk about that.
Get here early.
All right. Now, why would they want to get here early?
Well, because, I mean, that's where you're going to get to know people. There's some people who get here early and they're in the hub talking and visiting and just catching up. I mean, getting that space to have conversations with people, visit with visitors and get to know people and welcome them.
And I say that because you're right. There's a lot of people. I'm always in the hub at like 8:40 hanging out with people, drinking coffee, talking to them. And the people that want to talk, they're going to be there. Yeah. But there's people, and no judgment. It happens to all of us. You know, some days I'm late and some days you're late, and we all have that happen. But, you know, then there's some people, one member said, look, we got people coming in 10 minutes after the service starts, and they're leaving 5 minutes before you dismiss, and I never get to say hi to them. Yeah. Could you please allow us to shake hands? And I said, okay, we'll start doing that, because there's a epidemic that people are like coming in really, really late, and they're leaving really early. Well, how do you ever hope to be known? Yeah. So I know that sounds trivial, get here early, but why get here early? Yes. So you can fellowship with people, see people, be known. Okay, what else?
Absolutely. So get here early. Again, join a Sunday school class, get to be known in a smaller group where you can share prayer requests, minister to each other, get to know what's going on in people's lives. I mean, serve. You know, find something, one of your spiritual gifts, and get involved in the church. Bless others, right? We're not just here to come and get fed, right? People are like, well, I want to get fed. Well, yes, get fed, but also how are you feeding others? How are you serving other people, right? Because we're a family.
And your role as connection pastor, this is key. I mean, your goal is to try to help people get connected.
Yes.
So if they feel like they're not getting connected, they say, well, you know, I've tried 5 Sunday school classes. Well, we have other options. We have home groups. Yeah. And that's not to compete, but there's options. Yeah. So there's a lot of things we offer that are optional, not obligation. And we say that often. We say this is an option, not an obligation, because people will say to us, well, I'm just not getting connected. Yeah. Or they'll say, I just can't find the right thing, or whatever. And we're saying, well, look, there's all these things out there. Yeah. You're going to have to kind of meet us halfway, right? Yeah. So if somebody said, well, I'm not getting connected, you would say, well, contact me, Brady at BroadwayChurch.org.
Absolutely.
Email me, and I will help you get connected.
Yeah, there's Sunday school, there's home groups, there's equipping classes, there's discipleship groups. I mean, there's all kinds of options.
Men's and women's D groups that meet all over the city throughout the week.
Different times.
Yeah, there's multiple places to serve. We have a ministry fair once a year. Yep. A lot of people sign up for those things, and you get connected with people there. Of course, coming to the worship service. Yes. How could that be not so consumeristic and more involvement?
Yeah, I mean, just look for visitors, that people you don't recognize. Be quick to introduce yourself, even if it's a member who's been there a long time and you're just like, man, I don't remember them. Well, just take the initiative and introduce yourself, get to know people, and try to be intentional. Again, we're creatures of habit. We tend to sit in the same places, right? As humans, that's what we do. But you can still know the people around you, get to know them, and occasionally, if you're this adventurous, go sit somewhere else and get to know other people in the church room. And sit in a different spot. But just be present, right? Sing loud, encourage others with your singing. Pay attention to the service, take notes, right? Be fully present, right? We can be here and then be on our phone, fall asleep, not pay attention to the sermon. Well, that's just about the same thing as just not coming at all, right? So be present, be here, be locked in, right, by God's grace.
Sing. I mean, when everybody sings out loud, that will encourage you.
Encourages the body.
If you come in depressed, some people do. Yeah. You come in anxious. You come in sad. You come in blah. Well, you start hearing all these people around you singing, and then you start singing. There's something about saying some of the words, right? You are my Savior. You're my healer. You start saying those things. It like lifts you up. You hear other people saying it. It lifts you up. I mean, we know this works because, you go to a stadium where everybody's cheering for the same team, and it motivates you, gets you excited. You go to a concert, same thing. You go to a church service, everybody's worshiping and singing. So sing for the people around you. Yeah.
And the days when you're depressed and you're sick, or your parents just passed away and you have no words, guess what? The voices of your brothers and sisters in Christ will encourage you and will warm your heart and affections for Christ when you can't sing. But when you by God's grace can sing, will sing for others, not just sing to the Lord, but also sing to your brothers and sisters for them and for their encouragement's sake. And I mean, I would also encourage, as able, those of us who have young kids who have nap times and lunch and all that stuff sometimes have to leave church kind of quickly. The kids are melting down. They got to go home for their nap. But linger after the service, right? Get to know people, talk. So come early, stay a little bit late, right? Get to know people. Don't just rush out the door before no one can even say hi to you. I mean, that's...
There's a church in Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill Baptist. Josh Manley was a member there, one of our missionaries. And they have perfected staying after. Now, it's different there. It's a different culture. I don't think this would ever work here, but they do cookies and coffee after the worship service. And the times I've been there, I was there in 2019, the last time, before COVID, and I was just there at a regular service. It wasn't a weekender or anything like that. And the majority of the people stayed. The majority of the people stayed and fellowshipped. And it was kind of weird because my first thought was, wait, they have coffee and cookies after? It's like 12:30 when they get out. Aren't most people starving and ready to run to the restaurant or the house or whatever? And they said, no, people just stick around. They kind of eat the cookie first and then they go home and do lunch. And that was true. I was amazed. They just have it set up to where after service, we do the little VBS cookies, we hang out, and lots and lots and lots of people stayed. And they stayed for probably 30 minutes chatting. I mean, it looked like service was about to begin, but they have developed that over like 20 years. Stay and talk to people because they're in a very metropolitan area where when people leave, they go all over. They don't live around necessarily that area. They might work and live in all kinds of places. D.C. is bustling. But they stay in the fellowship. So how could we do that, right?
Well, I have noticed on Wednesday nights, I feel like people are lingering more after church on Wednesday, which I enjoyed a good conversation with the family last night after Wednesday nights, and I noticed like there's more people just kind of mingling after the service Wednesday, which I love. Right. I love it. That's great.
I did the same thing last night. I sat with Mary and Stacy, and we talked for 45 minutes. I learned things I'd never known before. But we had a good conversation, and I just went over to the table and sat down with the two of them, and I said, well, tell me all about it. And they just started talking about all kinds of stuff. And we had some good conversations about anxiety and what that is, and biblically, how does that work? And I thought, well, this has been so good and so helpful. And you're right. I'm seeing a lot of people stick around on Wednesday nights. So you got the meeting, the food time before the lesson, and so maybe that'll become a thing where people say, you know what, it's 6:30. I can hang out till 7.
Yeah, we do it again early enough that it's not like it's 9 o'clock at night. You can stay and talk for a little bit. And again, we're trying to provide food. There's fellowship time there to eat at tables with people. We're equipping you and the equipping classes, and then you can hang out and talk with more people. So it's, again, that's a family. You get to know people. Oh, I learned more about that member. I know how to pray for them now. I know I shared my heart. I feel known. I feel loved because someone heard me and what's going on in my life. And that can't happen if we're just in and out, coming in late, breezing out the door before the prayer is said. I mean, that's never going to happen, right? So
very good. Very good.
Got to be here.
Well, maybe your research will motivate some people to rethink, hey, do I want to live online or do I want to be known and loved and part of a local church, right?
That's
part
right.
of a family.
That's right.
Well, on that note, we will end this edition of Footnotes. Thank you, Brady. And thank you all for listening. This episode was sponsored by Brady's PhD that he spent lots of money on getting. And, of course, by the movie What's Eating Gilbert Grape, The Facts of Life, and You've Got Mail.
And MetaChurch in the VR.
And MetaChurch in the VR. That's right. I almost forgot. So on that note, we will end this edition of Footnotes. Thank you. Since February of 2022, we have been recording Footnotes. And it's been a great ride with a lot of positive feedback. With over 50 episodes, we've enjoyed having discussions and thoughts about all kinds of things ministry related that we simply don't have time to talk about during a regular worship service. We appreciate you, the listener. So many of you have just been encouraged. You've spoken so well, and you've let us know you're listening. We want you to know that we've completed Season 3 at the close of spring of 2024. But the good news is that we're coming back for Season 4, starting late summer of 2024, taking us through 2025. So stick around, be looking for those updates in Season 4 when we begin again sometime in July, and we'll look forward to being back together with Footnotes.